The generations freed from the Carter estate stepped into freedom with determination. Families like the Turners, the Walkers, the Gaskins, the Careys, the Thompsons, and the Wilsons began building their futures along the rivers and back roads of the Northern Neck. You can trace them in the early records of Westmoreland County, Lancaster County, and the surrounding Tidewater region. They appear buying small parcels of land, paying taxes, raising livestock, and building the kind of stability that slavery was designed to destroy. For a moment, it looked like freedom might take root. These families formed clusters of free black communities along creeks, crossroads, and old plantation boundaries. Some worked as carpenters and blacksmiths. Others became boatmen and watermen, navigating the same waterways that once carried tobacco ships to England. They built churches. They educated their children. They created foundations sturdy enough to withstand generations of pressure. But the world around them did not stand still. White elites watched these growing communities with suspicion. They questioned the legitimacy of black land ownership. They challenged deeds. They manipulated county surveys. Land that had been purchased legally was suddenly marked as disputed. Boundaries that had existed for decades were redrawn with the stroke of a pen. And then came the escheat cases, legal mechanisms that allowed the county to seize land if they claimed the owner had no heirs or had failed to pay taxes. Time after time, black families found themselves in court, defending property they had already earned, already paid for, already passed down. In cases across Westmoreland, Lancaster, and the surrounding counties, land belonging to families with Carter surnames or families tied to the Carter emancipations was taken, not by violence in the open, but by paperwork, by silence, and by officials who understood how to use the law as a weapon. The descendants of those freed by Carter's will and by his grandson's deed of gift in 1791 learned that freedom on paper did not mean freedom in practice. They faced new challenges: taxes strategically applied, court dates quietly issued, notices sent late or not at all. A farm could be seized because a clerk marked a debt that never existed. A family could lose land because a neighbor claimed the boundary was wrong, and the county sided with him without question. But there's something I didn't expect when I started tracing this story, something that turned this investigation from history into inheritance. As I analyzed the daybooks, the work logs, the emancipation records, certain names kept reappearing across different plantation sites, a line of men connected not just by labor, but by blood. Billy Thompson, born 1733, a cooper at Forest Quarter. His son, Hannibal Thompson, born around 1772, emancipated in 1795. And Hannibal's son, Daniel Thompson, born enslaved around 1782, freed through the deed of manumission, and later marrying Priscilla in 1813, building the first generation of my free ancestral family. When I connected the Carter records to county filings, and then to my own genealogical research, the truth became unmistakable. Billy is my 6th great-grandfather. Hannibal is my 5th great-grandfather. Daniel is my 4th great-grandfather. 3 generations, enslaved, emancipated, and rebuilding their lives in the same Northern Neck soil Carter once controlled. So when I speak about the people Carter freed, I'm not reciting distant history. I'm following the footsteps of my own family, people who survived the plantation system, stepped into uncertain freedom, and began shaping a future in a land that was never meant for them to rise. This isn't just a chapter in Virginia history. This is my lineage. And the story of what happened next is the story of how the Thompsons and so many other families freed in 1791 built the earliest free black communities in Westmoreland County. Stories don't just disappear on their own. Someone decides not to tell them. That's what happened to the freed families of the Northern Neck. Their freedom, their communities, their land, everything they built slowly vanished from the official histories. Not because it wasn't important, but because it didn't fit the story Virginia wanted to tell about itself. As the 19th century unfolded, Virginia rewrote its identity. Plantation wealth was praised, elite families were celebrated. The mythology of the Tidewater aristocracy took center stage. In that narrative, there was no room for the inconvenient truth that a powerful slaveholding dynasty had freed hundreds of people decades before the Civil War. There was no space for the story of free black communities buying land, building farms, raising families, and challenging the belief that black people could not survive outside of bondage. So the records were left in boxes, the ledgers were never published, The names in the free Negro registers were not carried into county histories. And when the lost cause ideology took hold after the Civil War, anything that complicated the idea of the Old South was quietly set aside. The manumissions ordered by Carter's will and later executed by his grandson in the 1790s didn't support the narrative of benevolent slavery or the fiction that enslaved people were incapable of self-determination. So the story disappeared behind courthouse walls. Behind me is Namanai Plantation, one of the largest estates in the northern neck of Virginia. Hundreds of enslaved men, women, and children lived and labored on this land. And beginning in 1791, Robert Carter, the counselor, set in motion the largest private emancipation in American history before the Civil War, freeing more than 400 people across his plantations in Westmoreland, Lancaster, Northumberland, Richmond, and even parts of Fauquier County. History leaves evidence, but it doesn't speak unless someone goes looking for it. The story of the Carter emancipations, the will, the deed of gift, and the hundreds of lives forever changed, wasn't lost. It was buried beneath convenience, pride, and the selective memory of a nation that only keeps the pieces of its past that make it feel comfortable. When we trace the surnames of the Gaskins, the Johnsons, the Thompsons, and many, many more, we're not just reading names on old paper. We're following the rise and endurance of families who stepped into freedom with courage. Families who bought land, raised children, built communities, and challenged everything the world believed about them. Families who survived bondage, survived the fragile promise of emancipation, survived courtroom corruption, land theft, and the long silence that tried to erase their legacy. Their journey forces us to confront a deeper truth. Freedom in America has never been handed down. It has always been fought for, often by people whose names never made the textbooks. People who carried their history in memory, in blood, in whispered stories, and in the determination to keep moving forward long after the world tried to push them back. This case is not about glorifying a slaveholder. It's about recognizing that even in the darkest corners of the past, human beings carved out a path toward dignity and survival. It's about understanding that liberation, no matter how delayed or incomplete, plants seeds that outlive the people who sow them. When you walk across the northern neck today, when you hear those surnames, when you see the remnants of Black communities along these creeks and fields, you are witnessing the living aftershock of a freedom that began centuries ago. A freedom nurtured through silence, recorded in ink, defended across generations by families who refused to let their story die. This is why we investigate. This is why we return to the archives. This is why we follow the evidence wherever it leads. Because somewhere in the forgotten pages of history, someone's story is waiting to be remembered. Someone's ancestor is waiting to be found. Someone's truth is waiting to be told. There is a realm just beyond the archive, between what we were told and what really happened. A space shaped by memory, shadow, and the echoes of those who came before us. You have just crossed the threshold. With Amari Truth, the history detective. Don't forget to like and subscribe.